Hello, and welcome to All for the Journey. I'm your journey reader, Eric Thompson. Today's Bible reading takes place in 2 Kings chapters 10 through 13. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Our scheduled reading follows the Bishop for Peace Ignite the Truth Bible reading plan. So let's begin. Chapter 10. Now Ahab had 70 sons living in the city of Samaria. So Jehu wrote a letter and sent copies to Samaria, to the officials of the city, to the leaders of the people, and to the guardians of King Ahab's sons. And the letter said, "The king's sons are with you, and you have all your disposal chariots, horses, a fortified city, and weapons. As soon as you receive this letter, select the best qualified of King Ahab's sons to be your king, and prepare to fight for Ahab's dynasty." But they were paralyzed with fear and said, "Two kings couldn't stand against this man. What can we do?" So the palace and the city administrators, together with the other leaders and the guardians of the king's sons, sent this message to Jehu: "We are your servants, and we will do anything you tell us. We will not make anyone king. Do whatever you think is best." Jehu responded with a second letter: "If you are not on my side and are going to obey me, if you are on my side and you're going to obey me, bring the heads of the king's sons to me at Jezreel about this time tomorrow." Now the 70 sons of the king were being cared for by the leaders of Samaria, where they had been raised since childhood. When the letter arrived, the leaders killed all 70 of the king's sons. They placed their heads in baskets and presented them to Jehu in Jezreel. A messenger went to Jehu and said, "They have brought the heads of the king's sons." So Jehu ordered, "Pile them in 2 heaps at the entrance of the city, and leave them there until morning." In the morning, he went out and spoke to the crowd that had gathered around him. "You aren't to blame," he told them. "I am the one who conspired against my master and killed him. But who killed all these? You can be sure that the message of the Lord that was spoken concerning Ahab's family will not fail. The Lord declared through his servant Elijah that this would happen." Then Jehu killed all of Ahab's relatives living in Jezreel, and all his important officials, personal friends, and priests. So Ahab was left without a single survivor. Then Jehu set out for Samaria. Along the way, while he was at Beth Eked of the shepherds, he met some relatives of King Ahaziah of Judah. "Who are you?" he asked them. And they replied, "We are relatives of King Ahaziah. We are going to visit the sons of King Ahab and the queen mother." "Take them alive," Jehu shouted to his men, and they captured all 42 of them and killed them at the well of Beth Eked. None of them escaped. When Jehu left there, he met Jehonadab, son of Rechab, who was coming to meet him. After they greeted each other, Jehu said, "Are you as loyal to me as I am to you?" "Yes, I am," Jehonadab replied. "If you are," Jehu said, "then give me your hand." So Jehonadab put out his hand, and Jehu helped him into the chariot. Then Jehu said, "Now come with me and see how devoted I am to the Lord." So Jehonadab rode along with him. And Jehu arrived in Samaria. He killed everyone who was left there from Ahab's family, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. Then Jehu called a meeting of all the people of the city and said to them, "Ahab hardly worshipped Baal at all compared to the way I worship him. Summon all the prophets and worshippers of Baal, and call together all his priests. See to it that every one of them comes, for I am going to offer a great sacrifice to Baal. Any of Baal's worshippers who fail to come will be put to death. But Jehu's plan was to destroy all the worshippers of Baal. Then Jehu ordered, prepare a solemn assembly to worship Baal. So they did. He sent messengers throughout all Israel, summoning those who worship Baal. They all came and filled the temple of Baal from one end to the other. And Jehu instructed the keeper of the wardrobe, be sure that every worshiper of Baal wears one of these robes. So robes were given to them. Then Jehu went into the temple of Baal with Jehonadab, son of Rechab. Jehu said to the worshippers of Baal, make sure that only those who worship Baal are here. Don't let anyone in who worships the Lord. So they were all inside the temple to offer sacrifice and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had surrounded the building with 80 of his men and had warned them, if you let anyone escape, you will pay for it with your own life. As soon as Jehu had finished sacrificing the burnt offering, he commanded his guards and officers, go in and kill all of them. Don't let a single one escape. So they killed them all with their swords, and the guards and officers dragged their bodies outside. Then Jehu's men went into the fortress of the temple of Baal. They dragged out the sacred pillar, used in the worship of Baal, and destroyed it. They broke down the sacred pillar of Baal and wrecked the temple of Baal, converting it into a public toilet. That is what is used for to this day. Thus, Jehu destroyed every trace of Baal worship from Israel. He did not, however, destroy the gold calves of Bethel and Dan, the great sin that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. Nonetheless, the Lord said to Jehu, you have done well in following my instructions to destroy the family of Ahab. Because of this, I will cause your descendants to be the kings of Israel down to the 4th generation. But Jehu did not obey the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He refused to turn from the sins of the idolatry that Jeroboam had led Israel to commit. About that time, the Lord began to reduce the size of Israel's territory. King Hazael conquered several sections of the country, east of the Jordan, including all of Gilead, Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh. He conquered the area from the town of Aroer by the Arnon Gorge to as far as Gilead and Bashan. The rest of the events of Jehu's reign and all his deeds and achievements are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jehu died, he was buried with his ancestors in Samaria. Then his son, Jehoahaz, I'm sorry, y'all, forgive me working with these names, Jehoahaz became the next king. In all, Jehu reigned over Israel from Samaria for 28 years. I'm going to get these names. Chapter 11. Then, after Leah, the mother of King Ahaziah of Judah, learned that her son was dead, she set out to destroy the rest of the royal family. But Ahaziah's sister, Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram, took Ahaziah's infant, Joash, and stole him away from among the rest of the king's children who were about to be killed. Just Jehosheba and Joash and his nurse in a bedroom to hide. Jehosheba put Joash and his nurse in a bedroom to hide from Athaliah, so the child was not murdered. Joash and his nurse remained hidden in the temple of the Lord for 6 years, while Athaliah ruled over the land. In the 7th year of Athaliah's reign, Jehoiada the priest summoned the commanders, the Karite mercenaries, and the guards to come to the temple of the Lord. He made a pact with them and made them swear an oath of loyalty there in the Lord's temple. Then he showed them the king's son. Jehoiada told them, "This is what you must do. A third of you who are on duty on the Sabbath are to guard the royal palace itself. Another third of you are to stand guard at the Shur gate, and the final third must stand guard behind the palace guard. These 3 groups will all guard the palace. The other 2 units who are off duty on the Sabbath must stand guard for the king at the Lord's temple. Form a bodyguard for the king and keep your weapons in hand. Any unauthorized person who approaches you must be killed. Stay right beside the king at all times." So the commanders did everything just as Jehoiada the priest ordered. The commanders took charge of the men reporting for duty that Sabbath, as well as those who were going off duty. They brought them all to Jehoiada the priest, and he supplied them with the spears and shields that had once belonged to King David and were stored in the temple of the Lord. The guards stationed themselves around the king with their weapons ready. They formed a line from the south side of the temple around to the north side and all around the altar. Then Jehoiada brought out Joash, the king's son, and placed the crown on his head. He presented Joash with a copy of God's covenant and proclaimed him king. They anointed him, and all the people clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king!" Then Athaliah heard all the noise made by the guards and the people. She hurried to the Lord's temple to see what was happening. And she saw the newly crowned king standing in his place of authority by the pillar, as was the custom at times of coronation. The officers and trumpeters were surrounding him, and people from all over the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. When Athaliah saw all this, she tore her clothes in despair and shouted, "Treason! Treason!" Then Jehoiada the priest ordered the commanders who were in charge of the troops, "Take her out of the temple and kill anyone who tries to rescue her. Do not kill her here in the temple of the Lord." So they seized her and led her out to the gates where horses enter the palace grounds, and was killed there. Then Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people that would be the Lord's people. He also made a covenant between the king and the people. And all the people of the land went over to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They demolished the altars and smashed the idols to pieces, and they killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Jehoiada the priest stationed guards at the temple of the Lord. Then the commanders, the Karite mercenaries, the guards, and all the people of the land escorted the king from the temple of the Lord. They went through the gate of the guards and into the palace, and the king took his seat on the royal throne. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was peaceful because Athaliah had been killed at the king's palace. Joash was 7 years old when he became king. Chapter 12. Joash began to rule over Judah in the 7th year of King Jehu's reign in Israel. He reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother was Zabiah from Beersheba. All his life Joash did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight because Jehoiada the priest instructed him. Yet even so, he did not destroy the pagan shrines, and the people still offered sacrifices and burnt incense there. One day, King Joash said to the priests, "Collect all the money brought as a sacred offering to the Lord's temple, whether it is a regular assessment, a payment of vow, or a voluntary gift. Let the priests take some of that money to pay for whatever repairs are needed at the temple." By the 23rd year of Joash's reign, the priests still had not repaired the temple. So King Joash called for Jehoiada and the other priests and asked them, "Why haven't you repaired the temple? Don't use any more gifts for our own needs. From now on, it must be all spent on getting the temple into good condition." So the priests agreed not to collect any more money from the people, and they also agreed not to undertake the repairs of the temple themselves. Then Jehoiada, the priest, bored a hole in the lid of a large chest and set it on the right-hand side of the altar at the entrance of the temple of the Lord. The priest guarding the entrance put all of these people's contributions into the chest. Whenever the chest became full, the court secretary and the high priest counted the money that had been brought into the Lord's temple and put it into bags. Then they gave the money to the construction supervisors, who used it to pay the people working on the Lord's temple: the carpenters, the builders, the masons, and the stone cutters. They also used the money to buy timber and cut stones for repairing the Lord's temple, and they paid any other expenses related to the temple's restoration. The money brought to the temple was not used for making silver cups, lamp snuffers, basins, trumpets, or other articles of gold or silver for the temple of the Lord. It was paid out to the workmen who used it for the temple's repairs. No accounting was required from the construction supervisors because they were honest and faithful workers. However, the money that was contributed for guilt offerings and sin offerings was not brought into the Lord's temple. It was given to the priests for their own use. At this time, King Hazael of Aram went to war against Gath and captured it. Then he turned to attack Jerusalem. King Joash collected all the sacred objects that Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Ahaziah, the previous kings of Judah, had dedicated, along with what he himself had dedicated. He sent them all to Hazael, along with all of the gold in the treasuries of the Lord's temple and the royal palace. So Hazael called off his attack on Jerusalem. The rest of the events of Joash's reign and all his deeds are recorded in the book of the history of kings of Judah. But his officers plotted against him and assassinated him in Beth Milo on the road of Shiloh. The assassins were Jozabad, son of Shemiath, and Jehozabad, son of Shomer, both trusted advisors. Joash was buried with his ancestors in the city of David, and his son Amaziah became the next priest. Chapter 13. Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, became the ruler of Israel in the 23rd year of King Joash's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 17 years, but he did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He followed the example of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, continuing the sins of idolatry that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. So the Lord was very angry with Israel, and he allowed King Hazael of Aram and his son Ben-Hadad to attack them time after time. Then Jehoahaz prayed for the Lord's help, and the Lord heard his prayer. The Lord can see how terribly the king of Aram was oppressing Israel. So the Lord raised up a deliverer to rescue the Israelites from the tyranny of the Arameans. Then Israel lived in safety again as they had in former days. But they continued to sin, following the evil example of Jeroboam. They even set up an Asherah pole in Samaria. Finally, Jehoahaz's army was reduced to 50 mounted troops, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. The king of Aram had killed the others like they were dust under his feet. The rest of the events in Jehoahaz's reign and all his deeds, including the extent of his power, are recorded in the book of the history of kings of Israel. When Jehoahaz died, he was buried in Samaria with his ancestors. Then his son Jehoash became the next king. Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, began to rule over Israel in the 37th year of King Joash reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 16 years, but he did what's evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to turn from the sins of idolatry that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. The rest of the events of Jehoahaz's reign and all of his deeds, including the extent of his power and his war with King Amaziah of Judah, are recorded in the book of history of the kings of Israel. When Jehoash died, he was buried with his ancestors in Samaria. Then his son Jeroboam II became the next king. When Elisha was in his last illness, King Jehoash of Israel visited him and wept over him. My father, the chariots and charioteers of Israel, he cried. Elisha told him, get a bow and some arrows. And the king did as he was told. Then Elisha told the king of Israel to put his hand on the bow, and Elisha laid his own hand on the king's hand. Then he commanded, open that eastern window, and he opened it. Then he said, shoot. So he did. Then Elisha proclaimed, this is the Lord's arrow, full of victory over Aram, for you will completely conquer the Arameans at Aphek. Now pick up the other arrows and strike them against the ground. So the king picked up and struck the ground 3 times. But the man of God was angry with him. You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, he exclaimed. Then you would have beaten Aram until they were entirely destroyed. Now you will be victorious only 3 times. Then Elisha died and was buried. Groups of Moabites, raiders, used to invade the land each spring. Once, when some Israelites were burying a man, they spied a band of these raiders. So they hastily threw the body they were burying into the tomb of Elisha. But as soon as the body touched Elisha's bones, the dead man revived and jumped to his feet. Wow. When King Hazael of Aram had oppressed Israel during the entire reign of King Jehoash, but the Lord was gracious to the people of Israel, and they were not totally destroyed. He pitied them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And to this day, he still has not completely destroyed them or banished them from his presence. King Hazael of Aram died, and his son Ben-Hadad became the next king. Then Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, recaptured from Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael, the towns that Hazael had taken from Jehoash's father, Jehoahaz, and Jehoash defeated Ben-Hadad on 3 occasions, and so recovered the Israelites' towns. Thank you for bearing with me with all these names. I appreciate it. Also, just thank you for allowing us to just spend this time together to hear God's words. I pray that you heard something that, God was speaking to you personally about. Partial obedience is disobedience, is what I got out of that. And it was pretty heavy, and there was a lot of betrayal. There was a lot of, like I say, partial disobedience. I think that's the key thing. I think we should take the time out to pray and ask God to show us those areas in our lives that we still hold on to, that we haven't fully let go of, and ask Him for forgiveness and strength to turn away from. So anyway, I hope you'll be blessed by this word and that you have a blessed day. And once again, thank you, and God bless you.